Hi guys, you know the drill. I'm here to go through the books I read in October from least favorite to favorite. It was a pretty bad reading month. Mostly that was because I just read so many okay, pretty good, 3-star kind of books. But also I overcommitted myself with my reading goals. Last month was the 100-year anniversary of the Russian October Revolution, so I wanted to read at least one book by a Russian author. I wanted to do Man Booker reading and get to books that I was gifted for Christmas last year, and continue with Anne and Eric Book Club, and participate in Booktober, and get to creepy Halloween reads. And I also wanted to participate in Mercedes' Autumn Readathon. I loved the categories that she chose, but at that point I felt like I was just suffocating myself with all of these reading goals, which is so stupid because no one is holding a gun to my head and telling me I need to read certain books. And on the flip side of that, no one's paying me to read certain books either. These are all artificial pressures. It's so stupid. Anyway, let's get to the books themselves. And because my brain recently has done a really bad job of being a brain, these are going to be pretty quick hits. My least favorite read was the one I picked up for Booktober, Mary Barton by Elizabeth Gaskell. This was my fourth of her books and starts in 1839 Manchester with a girl named Mary Barton and her father, John, who's a mill worker who's angry about the gap between the complacent masters and the struggling workers. The first half gives you lots of character studies and draws a portrait of Manchester's city life, including slums. This was Gaskell's first novel, and her narrator was clearly addressing wealthy English readers who weren't familiar with the realities of poor urban lives. So it's such an interesting mix of revolutionary rhetoric and perspectives, but then Gaskell meeting her readers halfway at points. Midway through, a crime is committed. Don't read the back of this Penguin edition if you don't want to know what it is. And after that point, it effectively becomes a glacial pedestrian crime drama. And the ending features some of the most heavy-handed Christian moralizing I've ever read. And in general, I don't mind heavy Christian themes in Victorian novels. That was a part of the culture, so of course it's going to be an important part of the fabric of so many of these books. But what I do mind is Gaskell throwing her characters, as she established them, under the bus to teach the audience a lesson. I didn't appreciate it, so I wouldn't recommend this as a first, second, or third Gaskell, but I love her writing in general, and I'm happy to have read more of it. Then there's Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. You probably all know the basics of this. Sandberg is the COO of Facebook, and she wrote this to encourage women to take more risks and advocate more for themselves in the workplace. This came out when I was an undergraduate, and I have to admit that I was skeptical of the premise. It seemed like blaming women for workplace inequality, like we just didn't want it enough or weren't working hard enough. But that's not what this is. I was wrong. It's Sandberg taking a hard look at all different reasons why women often don't advance in the workplace, many of which are out of our control. But then she focuses on the areas where we do have more agency than we might have thought. And I found that really helpful and empowering. So for example, she talks about how women typically apply for jobs where they meet 100% of the posted criteria, and men typically apply for jobs where they meet at least 60% of the posted qualification criteria. And even just knowing that statistic makes me more likely to apply for jobs that I'm interested in but not 100% qualified for. Sandberg presents a narrow vision of life in this book. It's all heterosexual, married people working corporate jobs, and race isn't considered carefully. But I think a lot of the advice can be extrapolated. If you're into feminism that's about tearing the world down and starting over, this won't be for you. But I think it's a great read for people of all genders who are interested in learning about the unconscious workplace biases that almost all of us have. Up next was my poetry collection for the month, Another Language by Saniel Elkind, with photographs by Burkhalter-Lackey. And Elkind was from Pittsburgh and only started writing poetry when she was 64, which I think is awesome. Like, not everybody starts out as a 27-year-old writing prodigy. And this is just a lovely, simple collection about growing old. So there are poems about loneliness and regularly watching people you love die, and about your body and memory warping and sagging. Here's one of the poems called Senility. It happens suddenly. One day, you open your mouth, and sounds come out like Scrabble tiles where all you pick are consonants. Another one of my favorites has the narrator looking down at her hands and realizing that they look like her grandmother's. There's something earth-shattering in here. There are no linguistic gymnastics, but I think it's definitely worth a read if you can get your hands on a copy. Then there's the Man Booker's shortlisted debut Elmet by Fiona Mozley. I did a full video review of this and a full written review for Open Letters that's much more thorough, and both of those are linked below if you're interested. Next is The Good People by Hannah Kent. Now, for me, Kent is a hard author to talk about because what she does well, she does phenomenally well. And where she falls flat, she falls pancake flat. And this book has a mix of both. So this is set in 19th century Ireland in a rural village where a recently widowed woman named Nora is taking care of her young grandson, who we would now say is mentally and physically disabled. Nora becomes convinced that the child is a changeling, and so she goes to an old medicine woman to help her get her real grandson back. So first, the successful things. The landscape descriptions are gorgeous and evocative, and this is such an immersive novel. Like, I could hear and smell and breathe 19th century Ireland, and at a certain point, I stopped reading like a modern reader. There's a scene where a birth goes wrong, and the women who are helping to deliver the baby perform a million little rituals that I knew intellectually would have no medical effect. But I was thinking like the women in the scene at that point, not like myself. So I was like, put pig's blood on the door, wave some incense around, chant, like do what you have to do to deliver this baby. The last main positive is an odd one. Kent really made me confront the ugly feelings I had about the grandson. My skin crawled at some of the descriptions of him. I'm assuming that a lot of readers are better people than I am, but some will have that same experience of being involuntarily disgusted by this child and having scary, immoral thoughts about him. So why didn't I love this novel? Okay, first of all, the characters are flat. They're serviceable, but they never feel like distinct people, especially the side characters. And this is a problem that she had in her first novel, Burial Rites, where within 2 sentences of a side character being introduced, I'd know exactly what function he or she was going to serve in the plot. But the larger problem is that The Good People has an incredibly static feel to it. After about the first third, there's no sense of new possibilities or momentum, so it becomes a monotonous crawl of bad events, and repetitive too. At a certain point, it felt like a lot of Kent's descriptions were because she wanted to include more of her research, not because the book actually needed them, which is a shame, but I'll still be really excited for whatever Kent writes next. Then there's my play and my Russian pick for the month, The Cherry Orchard by Chekhov. This is the first of 4 major plays in this edition, although it was his last play that he ever wrote. It was published in 1903 and is about a Russian aristocratic family who's forced to sell their house and land when they go into debt. And it's a sedate, meditative look at the effects of the abolition of serfdom in the previous century and the rise of the middle class, and a look at new intellectual currents of the day. If you just read it for the words on the page, it'll be a pretty boring experience, so I suggest you pick it up if you're in the mood to think about what each character symbolizes and do a little extra work. Then there's All We Shall Know by Donal Ryan, which was a pick for the Anna and Eric book club. I talked about its plot in a video I'll link below about sad book recommendations. I think this is a great book. Its main drawback comes from placing it in the context of other books, because it's pretty generic literary fiction. It's about a narrator who's neurotically reflecting on her depression and self-destruction, and it's all done in a pretty standard way. But I do recommend it if the premise interests you. Then I have 2 great graphic novels, The Encyclopedia of Early Earth by Isabel Greenberg and Through the Woods by Emily Carroll. Greenberg's is a really playful imagining of a world called Early Earth, created by the daughter of a god called Birdman. It's inspired by a bunch of different world mythologies and has stories within stories that are ultimately about how beautiful and necessary storytelling itself is. Possibly unpopular opinion, but I liked it a lot more than her other book, The 100 Nights of Hero. I think that the humor in this one just landed a lot more with me. Through the Woods is 5 short, creepy fairy tales. Think less whimsy and more horror. The text is pretty standard and the stories fly by. I would have loved for them to be twice as long, but the art is meant to do more than half the work, and it is stunning and so effective at drawing you into the atmospheres of these tales. I reread the first one over and over because I didn't want to leave the feeling that story gave me. So I highly recommend this one as a simple, chilling read with breathtaking artwork. Surprisingly, my second favorite book of the month was Swing Time by Zadie Smith. I'll be doing a full review on this one because it was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize. This has major structural issues, but I liked it a lot more than I thought I would based on the lukewarm reception it's gotten, so stay tuned if you want more details. Finally, further proof that it was a sad reading month is that my favorite book was a reread, The Golden Compass or Northern Lights by Philip Pullman, which is the first in the His Dark Materials trilogy. I loved this as a kid, but I forgot how good it is. It's about a little girl named Lyra who lives in Oxford in a world that's similar to ours, but in this world souls exist on the outside of bodies in the form of animals called demons. It's a story filled with amazing characters, including kidnappers called gobblers, witches, talking armored bears. It's action-packed and exquisitely written and explores the tensions between science and religion and all different perceptions of good and evil. So if you haven't read it yet, I add my voice to the many that recommend it. Whew, okay, let me know what you think about any of these books, and I'll see you guys soon for another video. Bye. Thanks for watching.